Morning, everyone. We've just started the webinar, but we'll give it a minute just so individuals can join. I can see there's people joining now, so we'll give it a couple of minutes just to let people log on. Okay, I think we'll make a start. So hello everyone and welcome to our July webinar. I hope for those of you who've joined us live that you found somewhere cool, and for those of you who are joining us at 3 AM watching our YouTube channel because it's just too hot to sleep, welcome to you as well. As our regular listeners will know, that we do run monthly webinars, and even though our last webinar was only a few weeks ago, I feel that somewhat a lifetime has passed again, and I'm sure that some of you will be thinking the same as well. So today you get a two-for-one deal. You've got myself, Emma O'Connor, Director and Head of HR Training, who's going to be leading a discussion on some employment changes. And Chris Harber, who's our Head of Immigration, is joining us as well to give us an immigration update. So good morning, Chris.
Thank you, Emma. Pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
So for those who don't know Boyce Turner, we are a commercial law firm we support clients in the Thames Valley, the UK, Europe and globally. Our employment team gives HR advice, litigation support, as well as help with coaching, mentoring, mediation, and of course, immigration. Just a bit of admin before we start. You've got our contact details there on the slide. I will write to you as well with our details if you do have any questions that you want to ask outside of the webinar today. If you do wish to ask a question, if you could just pop that in the chat box, please, and if you could address that, please, to the panelists, and then we can pick that up. And also, as ever, this is an overview. I have checked the news feeds to make sure there's nothing changed before we've gone to broadcast, but it is an overview. So again, if you need specific help and advice, then please do get in touch. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to be having a look at some of the Freedom Day issues, and I'm going to be giving you some of my return to work top tips. Also be having a look at the job retention scheme and where we are with that and where we might be at the end of September, and also picking up on holidays and some of the issues there around holidays. And then Chris is going to lead a discussion around some of the changes that have been happening in the world of business immigration, and there has been a lot. So again, looking at the COVID adjustments there that have been made at the end of the EU grace period, and again looking at some of those graduates routes as well as the sponsorship management scheme. So lots there going on and lots to talk about. So the 19th of July was obviously heralded as Freedom Day, and yes, we did see lifting of restrictions, particularly around social distancing, and also that the messaging around returning to work. But again, it was put in terms of, you know, there is to be a gradual return to work, and very much placing the onus there really on employers and their workforces to work out how they're going to make this happen. We have seen new sector-specific health and safety guidance that has been published. And if you've not had the opportunity to have a look at that, I would go and have a look at the government guidance, and I can pop that in my follow-up email to you all. And there's really a focus, particularly around ventilation, particularly around those good hygiene messages, hand washing, hand sanitizing, and again, around having those systems of internal infection controls. And another big piece is going to be around risk assessments. So again, we must remember that the COVID secure measures, the COVID secure obligations sit above those general health and safety rules and regulations. So as well as complying with all those obligations, we must of course sort of have that sort of extra layer on top of that. So again, it's really important to carry out those risk assessments, focus very much as well on those individuals who are perhaps vulnerable or more vulnerable, or live with people who are perhaps more vulnerable. So again, focusing on those individuals as well. Do keep records of your risk assessments, but also any measures that you take to mitigate any of those issues that do arise. And I think this is really important, particularly in the cases that we've seen around health and safety dismissal. So this sort of Section 44 or Section 100 of the Employment Rights Act, the cases that we've seen that have been coming out around individuals who have been dismissed for failure to follow reasonable management instructions, and there's been an allegation of health and safety. Having that record and having that evidence to be able to support and show what steps that you have taken to mitigate any risk is going to be really important. So again, just to sort of flag that to you as well. One notable point in the guidance, and again, there's guidance for various different sectors, so office, people who work in an office, construction, hospitality, and retail. One thing that is quite interesting is that there's been a shift away from temperature checking because it's been recognised that that's not one of the best ways to check to see whether an individual does have any symptoms. So risk assessments, health and safety protocols, but again, you know, the issues around that. So what are we telling our people? Do we need some training on health and safety obligations, and really reinforcing the message that this is important. And not only do employers have to take reasonable steps to protect their employees, their staff, and you know, their customers and their visitors, but also, you know, there is a reciprocal obligation there on employees as well to follow the rules and also to protect their own health and safety as well. So again, it's about making sure that you've got that messaging for your people, and you've really thought about, you know, what do we need to do? Do we need to do some health and safety updates, some vlogs, some training? Again, to sort of really reinforce that messaging. And I think, you know, around the sort of return to work, what I'm sensing, and it may be something that you're considering as well with your leaders and boards, is very much people are going to use the next 2 months, because, you know, it's the summer and we've got holidays as well during this period, and really using this time to really think about what we want to do and how we want our people to work, and where we want our people to work as well. And I wrote an article last week for our People in Focus magazine, just really a sort of a briefing note, just some of the issues that I was looking at and thinking about. And again, I'll send that round because there are some sort of practice points in there. But if I might just be able to sort of give you a few of my little top tips on thinking about return to work. And I think the first thing I would say is really looking at planning and purpose. Why do we want people to return to work? And I think that's a quite an important discussion to have. You know, why is it that we want our people to come back? For some businesses that may be obvious. You know, we've got clear evidence that, you know, there's been productivity has been affected, or we haven't been able to look after our clients in a way that we would have liked. But for others, we might be thinking about things in sort of more terms of, you know, collaboration and teamwork and mentoring. So I think it's going to be important that we have those discussions, and again, talk to your people, you know, get their views as well, but really thinking about the reason why do we want our people to return? And then of course, again, have to think about the planning, aren't we? You know, what is this return to work going to look like for our business? So again, you know, really thinking about your business. I've said there about creating this culture of communication, and I think that, you know, I think that's really improved actually during this last 18 months. And I would say it's actually been one of the positives, certainly the feedback I've been getting, and certainly, you know, with our own firm as well, you know, with vlogs, regular updates, HR check-ins, team meetings. You know, it's been really good way to use the technology to be able to keep in touch with your people, so we feel that connection that perhaps we haven't got physically. But what I would say is that your people are going to need notice of when, you know, and if and how you want them to return to site, because people have, they have perhaps, changed their lifestyles. They might be thinking about things in a different way. So we really do need to give people time to be able to make alternative arrangements. So again, really factor that into your planning and the timetable. And I think, keep the good bits. As I've said, communication may have improved across the business. And we may have people having more team meetings, daily calls, one-to-ones. There's been some really positive stuff that has been going on. So again, how can we keep the good bits? And how can we maybe work on some of the things that haven't worked so well? So maybe some sort of leadership training about managing hybrid teams, maybe thinking about how can we use the technology to, not just get the teams together, but maybe get, larger groups of individuals together. So again, think about how we can make those good bits work. And the other point that I've been hearing about is that actually people who do work remotely or work part-time, sometimes in, sometimes out, actually with everybody being out, people have felt more included, because often sometimes you think that, I'm not in the office, I'm out of sight, out of mind, but actually with everybody being out, it's sort of, made the playing field, perhaps a little bit more level. So again, how can we really focus on that inclusion and making our teams more inclusive, particularly if we're thinking about moving to perhaps a hybrid model with some people in and some people out? How can we make sure that work is evenly distributed amongst teams? So again, something to think about there. I've put their flexible future. I think that there has been this sort of pressure that organisations feel that they have to make a decision. They had to make a decision on the 19th of July. But I think, we've got a couple of months to sort of really, think about how we want to work, what we want to work, and really sort of make our plans. But also factor in some flex into that. It might be that we're looking at maybe a 3, 6, or even a 12-month review to see what's worked and what we perhaps need to change. So again, factor in some flex into your plans. And I do think, restating culture, expectations, and values is going to be really important. And I can see that being a theme as we move forward into the autumn and into the new year as well. Really restating what it is you stand for as an organisation. As I've said, we felt connected in some ways, but disconnected in others. So what is it? Why do people work for you? And why should they work for you? And why should they continue to work for you? So again, some really clear messaging, I think, around our culture and our values. And again, you've heard me say it before, but I'm going to say it again. This is a marathon and it's not a sprint. So again, it's going to take time to readjust, to get people back in, to get us used to working with each other. So, really think, this is not going to be a quick fix as of the 1st of September. It's still going to take some time. And, with that, and actually part of that discussion is going to be around, the job retention scheme, which, I've written about and talked a lot about over the last 18 months. And we do have this end date. Many of us might be thinking, is it the end date? We've extended this scheme 4 times now. But we are told the 30th of September is that end date. And obviously we're in that sort of tapering time, aren't we, where we've got contributions from employers stepping up. So not only the tax and NI and pensions, we've now got to make a contribution as well. At the moment, that's 10%, and it's going to go up to 20%. And then obviously with an end date at the 30th of September. There have, of course, been calls from certainly the airline, travel, tourism sectors to keep something in place. There has been some discussion around perhaps sort of, bringing back in, if we can sort of, cast our minds back to what was called the job support scheme, where the emphasis is very much on what hours employees can do, rather than sort of at the moment where we're talking about employees who can't work. So there's funding there for individuals where they can work. But again, we'll keep you updated on that as well. But I think, there are going to be some challenges, aren't there? I think that as we've seen, people are coming off of furlough, and I'm going to talk in a moment and I'll just talk you through some of the stats. But I do think there are going to be some challenges. And I think this piece around inclusion, many managers have been managing teams, you know, 2-tier, 3-tier teams where you've got some people off, some people in, some people at work, or some people on flexi furlough. And I think, you know, when we're bringing people back into work, there's obviously going to be some sort of reintegration around, you know, how can we support those individuals who've been off for a really long time. You know, this is longer in many cases than people who've, you know, had babies or adopted. So it's going to be a really long time. And, you know, we will need to support our people through training, coaching, mentoring, you know, to give them that confidence and that can-do attitude. So there's going to be some work around that. I think redundancies as well, and we've talked about it before in webinars, you know, again, many of you businesses might be thinking about their workforces and their people numbers. So, you know, again, planning is going to be, you know, essential in that, particularly if we do have to do more involved consultation programs, depending on numbers there, where we might have to be looking at collective consultation. So again, if that's something that might be impacting on you, then again, get in touch. So I think that there will be some challenges ahead. And, you know, if we just have a little look at some of the stats in terms of where we are with the job retention scheme. So these are stats on the government's data research, which I checked last night. So they are current as at the 30th of May. So, you know, in total, 11.6 million people have been on the furlough scheme at various, at various points. And yes, the numbers have come down. So in April, we were looking at 3.5 million. At the end of May, 2.4 million people. So, you know, it is coming down. But, you know, the sectors that are still being affected and still using the scheme, mostly around travel, air travel, and the tourism sectors. So again, that's sort of reflecting what we're seeing in sort of, you know, wider society and wider sort of like, you know, economic landscape around the uncertainty with travel, but also not just people being able to go abroad from the UK, but obviously people being able to come into the UK and support our travel industry as well. So some difficulties there within those sectors. And I thought this was a quite, you know, an interesting statistic. And I think, you know, it does show and it does illustrate what perhaps many of us have been reading, that, you know, more women have been impacted by furlough, by, you know, what's been happening with sort of lockdowns and closures. So, you know, there are at the moment more men than women on furlough. And I think, again, as I said, that's going to really sort of, and that really sort of becomes part of that inclusivity messaging as well, about making sure that our workforces are inclusive, you know, we're making sure that we're integrating our people back into the business. And again, you know, 100 billion has been spent so far on supporting jobs, not just through furlough. So some figures there. And I think probably after all those figures, let's talk about holidays. And I do think that holidays are going to be one of our HR hot topics. They're going to be one of our HR pinch points. Now, as we know, last year emergency legislation was brought in to allow those individuals, and the aim of it was to support those in sort of key worker roles, those jobs where individuals were unable to take holiday last year because of pandemic, lockdown, and because simply, you know, they were essential staff that could not take holiday. So where it was not reasonably practicable for individuals to take holiday, they were able to carry over for 4 weeks. So the sort of the basic, very, very basic statutory EU holiday there, able to carry that over for 2 holiday years. And of course, there might be other contractual carryover rights as well on top of that. So, you know, we've got a bit of a perfect storm, haven't we, of, you know, maybe thinking about return to work. We know, you know, people are isolating, children have been off school, as well as, you know, people with a lot of holidays. So we've sort of got this sort of tremendous pressure on businesses. And I think that there's going to be pressure within teams where you do find that individuals are wanting to take holiday off maybe at the same time, and how do we ensure that we maintain business operations whilst also supporting our people? Because, you know, let's not forget that taking holiday not just going away, but taking holiday, taking a break from work, is a health and safety consideration. So, you know, we do have to balance that need, you know, for, you know, business continuity. We don't really want people banking loads of holiday and carrying that all over again to next year, because all we're doing is just, you know, creating a problem for next year potentially. But also the need to support our people. So, you know, I think we need to be auditing, okay, who's got what, and then try and plan accordingly and try and encourage people, particularly if they've not taken any holiday, whether this year or the start of this year as well, or only taken, you know, a few days off. You know, we really need to encourage our people to take some time off, even if they can't go away. That's not a limitation on taking holiday. So I think some, you know, really, you know, getting our managers there involved in those conversations, getting HR involved too, you know, really focusing on what holiday is. But of course, you know, taking holiday is, you know, it's a risky business at the moment. You know, we saw France being moved down to the Amber Plus. There's talk of maybe Spain as well. And so what do we do? What do we do as businesses? Because, you know, we need to know, don't we, that, you know, whether our staff might have to come back and quarantine. I think that certainly ask the question, you know, what are your plans? And I think it would be reasonable to ask, you know, where are you planning on going? You know, what are your plans when you come back? If people can work from home whilst isolating, that obviously is helpful. But if individuals can't work from home, that's going to make things a little bit more problematic, isn't it? And how we're going to manage that as a business. And I think what we've seen is actually businesses being very pragmatic and taking a much more common sense approach to taking holidays and where people go. And I think that should be encouraged. You know, I don't want to see, you know, businesses being very draconian and looking at sort of disciplinary policies. I think at the moment, working together is the best strategy. So, you know, audit what you've got, encourage and support people to take holiday, but then I think take a pragmatic approach about how we're going to manage any sort of rules there around self-isolating. And I've actually recorded a podcast this week, which was really looking at how businesses can support their workforce's mental health during this period. Because as I said, you know, we've got this perfect storm of holidays, school holidays, bit of isolating thrown in, maybe returning to work, travel uncertainty. So, you know, it's all sort of converging, isn't it, at once? So I recorded a podcast this week with Geraldine Jerikim of Mind Your Business. So again, that will be coming out, and I'll pop the link on that as well onto my follow-up to you all. So that brings me to the end of the employment update. So Chris, it's there's a lot going on in the employment world, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that actually, you know, this shift in tone around the sort of rather than things being, you know, mandatory to sort of personal responsibility, I think there's been a lot of uncertainty, hasn't it? And I think that's sort of the burden and on business as well, where they're trying to balance, you know, very, very tough health and safety rules, you know, employees very anxious, you know, about returning, and also, you know, what are we doing about PPE or distancing, and it is very difficult out there for businesses.
And you see a lot of that uncertainty and sort of personal responsibility a lot with the immigration side of the work as well, where the Home Office have tried to be as pragmatic as they possibly can, really, over the last 18 months or so, in terms of allowing flexible working, reducing reporting requirements. And so, yeah, I think that practical flexible approach isn't going away anytime soon, whether it be immigration, whether it be wider employment law, working practices, it's here to stay for quite a long time, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Right, immigration update.
Thank you, Emma.
Do tell us more.
So Hi everyone. I think I've spoken to most of you at various points in the past, but for those who I haven't seen before, welcome. Good to see you all. I've been with Boys Turner now for just coming up 8 months since the beginning of the year, so still fairly new to the team. In terms of my background and where my immigration sort of journey started, really is my background is very much with the Home Office. So I worked in a number of roles within the Home Office, predominantly in enforcement, so making sure that companies are running their licenses appropriately, investigating malpractices, and also a bit of work at the border as well. So I've got quite a varied background when it comes to sort of the Home Office side of things, and then since then I've been doing roles similar to this with other firms around the Thames Valley. Most recently, I ran an international software company's mobility scheme. So I've got a bit of a sort of hat in all angles, so a bit of in-house, bit of government, bit of advisory. So hopefully it's a fairly balanced approach that I can bring. I'm only really going to pick on 4 key areas that need to be highlighted in terms of immigration changes. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the last 6 or 7 months have probably seen the most changes to the UK's immigration system, certainly since 2008, arguably since the early 70s, when the Immigration Act was introduced, which has all been predominantly driven by Brexit, but also some allowances driven on by COVID and the pandemic. So there's been a mountain of change around the new skilled worker category, the changes on the salary and the skills thresholds. I'm not going to worry too much about those at the moment because they very much came in at the beginning of the year. So hopefully they're starting to settle in and become a bit of a rhythm. I'm just going to focus on 4 key areas which are a lot more current, a lot more focused at the moment and having a real impact on businesses and how they hire at the moment. So first key area, really, and probably the biggest, is the end of the grace period for EU workers in the UK. So obviously, since we left the European Union, EU nationals wanting to work in the UK have required specific immigration status to do that. So either under the EU settlement scheme or indeed via one of the other visa categories that the rest of the world previously used. The government introduced a grace period between starting on the 1st of Jan and ending on the 30th of June, whereby any EU nationals that started a new job only had to rely on their passports as their right to work. So that allowed for people who were already settled in the UK, who hadn't yet applied under the settlement scheme, to get their application in before the deadline of the 30th of June, without worrying about trying to how they evidence their right to work in the UK should they change jobs. That grace period is now finished. So the settlement applications for the EU settlement scheme have closed formally. In theory, almost all EU nationals already living in the UK have submitted their applications. There will be a small cohort who haven't. I'll talk about those in a second. But simply put, from now on, so since the 1st of July, any new EU nationals that you employ will need to provide you with a copy of their passports and also evidence of their immigration status in the UK. So for the vast majority of individuals, EU nationals, that will be evidence under the EU settlement scheme. Whether that's pre-settled status or settled status, they will be able to provide you with what's called a share code. So you'll be able to use the Home Office's online system to verify their right to work. Nice and simple. There will be some situations which are slightly more complicated than that. I would always say, if you're not sure of the category that the person's claiming they have status under, always seek legal advice on it. You will have some individuals who you sponsor yourself, so whether that's under the skilled worker or the intercompany transfer route, they're straightforward. You will have some individuals who had permanent residency prior to the settlement scheme. Again, they're fairly straightforward. They will have a visa they can show you. But there will be others who are going to struggle in terms of what documentation they've got, or they're under a very particular niche category. One exemption to this is Irish citizens. So Ireland sits under what's called the Common Travel Area Agreement, which is basically the British Isles and there is freedom of movement between the island of Ireland and the United Kingdom. So that predates and sits separately to the UK's membership of the European Union. So Irish nationals can still work freely in the UK. All they need to do is show their passports. Really important point here, which is a question that I've been asked an awful lot over the last few weeks, is that there is no requirement on any businesses to conduct retrospective checks on your existing EU staff to see if they applied under the settlement scheme. It's not to say you're not allowed to if you do want to. You can do it if you think that's necessary for the stability of your workforce, if you want to make sure that your workforce is all working legally in the UK. However, it's really important to stress that it must be done in a non-discriminatory manner. So you can't just target individuals or small cohorts. It must be a broad policy which where you ask all of your EU workers to re-evidence their right to work. And ultimately as well, it depends on the structure of your workforce, the size of your workforce, and potential liabilities as where you see them, whether you decide to do that or not. I'm seeing about a 50-50 split at the moment with companies that want to do it and companies that don't want to do it. For some companies, for some really big employers, it's just too burdensome. It's not a requirement, and trying to audit several thousand individuals is just not a practical step to take for their HR departments. For some companies, they want to do it to make sure that all of their workforce is legally working in the UK, and to identify anyone that hasn't applied yet so they can mitigate it. But ultimately, it's your choice. It's entirely up to you how you want to manage your workforce, how you perceive the risks to your workforce, and potential liabilities if further down the line it transpires that you have an individual or indeed a group of individuals who did not apply under the settlement scheme. Now that brings me nicely on to the last point on this slide around late applications and a transitional arrangement that the Home Office has brought in. So until the end of this year, if as a result of whether it be you do an audit or one of your staff approaches you and you discover that they haven't actually applied under the settlement scheme, you can continue employing them. So you do not have to cease employment immediately. There are certain conditions around this to be eligible for the transitional arrangements. So as soon as you're notified, the person has to apply under the settlement scheme with
I'm not sure if Chris is frozen, if that's just me or if that's him. Suzanne, is that just for me?
It's paused on mine as well, Emma.
Okay, that's fine. Unfortunately, I think we've lost Chris in full flow there. But I think the main points that are on the sort of the right to work checks that are very much around how we can look at the rules. We all know that getting those right to work checks are really important. Getting original documents, putting the date on them when you scan them, when you check them, is going to be really important for your auditing processes. So again, really looking at those rules. And as Chris said, no obligation to check your current staff unless you want to do that as part of a sort of an overall auditing process. So some really important points there about that. And I think that there are a lot of changes in immigration, and one thing I would say is that having Chris in our team, sometimes when he talks about things, I think, goodness me, maybe the job retention scheme that I've been moaning about for the last 18 months maybe isn't that complicated. But having Chris in the team really does help to sort of give that boost. And Chris, you're back.
Hi, man.
We're back. We're certainly live.
completely.
I finished off the point, Chris, about the right to work checks. So if you want to just talk us through those points around the sort of the COVID adjustments, if you've got those. Maybe we won't use the slides actually, because I'm.
If you can share your screen, I can talk through from there.
Okay, I will do my best. Right, are you able to see that, everybody? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, Chris, can you see those?
Yeah, I can see those. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So thank you, Emma, for picking that up. Very kind. So next topic we'll move on to is the COVID adjustments and how that's affected right to work checks. So since the pandemic began, or shortly afterwards, the Home Office have allowed companies to run adjusted right to work checks. So I'm sure most of you are already aware of these procedures and what they look like and how to do it. For those of you who haven't really had to hire many or have been aware of this, whilst the pandemic has been going on and the working from home advice has been in place, companies have had the option to conduct virtual right to work checks. So you can check someone's right to work in the UK over a video call, basically. So the procedure is simply put that the individual needs to email you a copy of their documentation. So you've got it in front of you. You then set up a video call with the individual where the person holds their document up to their head, so you can see it next to their head. Quite often, a lot of companies like to take a screenshot of that as well, just as additional evidence. And then when you, on that copy of the documents, or indeed if you have a separate database where you record where and how your right to work checks were completed, there's specific wording to make sure that it's obvious that it was an adjusted check. And now I put that on the slide there. So you simply need to write adjusted check undertaken on such a date due to COVID-19. And that satisfies you at the Home Office. And that gives you the necessary statutory excuse against civil penalties if it transpires that the individual does not have the right to work in the UK and they've duped you, basically. Previously, the Home Office guidance was that employers had to do retrospective checks on anyone that they hired under the adjusted checks, and they had to go back and do a full right to work check on everyone. That caused a great deal of consternation amongst employers and HR departments. And some larger employers in particular, I think the supermarkets really led on this. It was just going to cause chaos trying to redo right to work checks on, in some cases, tens of thousands of individuals that they hired during the pandemic, especially where you see the main sort of industries that had significant boons in their staff. So the supermarkets, courier companies, e-commerce companies, the pressure that was going to be put on them to redo the right to work checks was going to cause chaos. Simply put, with their HR departments. And so they decided a few weeks ago to remove that requirement. So anyone you've hired under the adjustments will continue to have the right to work in the UK once the adjustment period ends, and there is no requirement to have to conduct retrospective checks on any individuals you've hired since the pandemic. And most importantly, finally, the adjustments are going to continue to be in place until the end of August this year. They had originally planned to end them earlier this year in May, which wasn't actually in line with the government's wider policy on working from home. And so the government initially extended it to coincide with the previous Freedom Day. And then they've since extended it again until the 31st of August to try and give employers as much time to prepare and get used to doing manual checks again as they possibly can. If we go on to the next slide then, please, Emma. Fantastic. So one of the big visa categories that has launched this year, or indeed relaunched, is the graduate route. So for some of you, you'll probably remember going back a few years, the UK used to have a graduate route, and the Home Office decided to close it at that time because they weren't satisfied. They were seeing enough of a return on the freedoms that the graduate route offered, and they were quite concerned that the route was being abused and that it was leading to quite a lot of abuse of the immigration system in general. So they took the decision to close it. In hindsight, I think the Home Office now acknowledged that was a bit preemptive, and they were making a policy based on a very small cohort of individuals that had nefarious intentions, and that the impact on the significantly wider and bigger cohort of people who were using it with good intentions, and it was helping them look for jobs in the UK, were being adversely impacted. So we've relaunched the scheme this year. The scheme, the graduate route, opened on the 1st of July for applications. And simply put, what it means is for any international students who were studying at university in the UK on a student visa, once they finish their course, they can apply to switch on to the graduate visa. And that gives them an additional 2 years to remain in the UK. They can work in any job they want to. They don't have to work if they can afford to support themselves. There's no salary thresholds, there's no skills thresholds. And simply, it just gives the individual a chance to settle into life in the UK, have a bit more time and a bit more flexibility to find the right job for them, and eventually, hopefully, look to switch on to the skilled worker visa and settle in the UK. One of the things that the graduate visa offers, which is really the biggest attraction, is that it takes away pressure from having to find a skilled job immediately out of university. Quite often, I know it was a similar situation with myself as well, and many of my friends, that immediate pressure of having to find a job within a couple of months of graduating may not necessarily be the right choice for you. You may want to go and choose to take a couple of months off, do some traveling, do some part-time work, just sort of settle down before you then look for a skilled role. Indeed, it might be the case that you apply and you're not successful in the first round, and then in 12 months' time, you can look at new graduate schemes and go again. So the graduate route just gives a bit more flexibility, a bit more opportunity for international students who want to work in the UK. So it's fundamentally, it's a really good category. It's a really good option for students. And how that fits in with employers is that it gives employers a bit more time to not necessarily vet and decide on who you want to employ, but it gives you a bit more opportunity to let people settle into a business before you decide to then go and sponsor them on a skilled worker visa. The skilled worker visa is a big commitment from the employer in terms of cost and in terms of the administration that goes along with it. So it just gives you as an employer a bit more opportunity to get to know the individual, let them settle into their role. And then once they start to come towards the end of their graduate visa, then you can look at switching them onto a skilled worker visa. So it's a win-win for everyone, really. Okay, if we go on to my last slide then, please, Ellen. So just to finish off, these are a couple of more technical points for those of you who have got sponsor licenses and use your sponsor management system on a regular basis. So if any of you have done a visa for a skilled worker or an intercompany transfer since the beginning of December last year, you'll have noticed that you need to include details of the individual's PAYE reference number when you make the application. Now that's the Home Office went a little bit under the radar with this one. They didn't really announce it and they didn't really publicise it. It was suddenly imposed on the 1st of December, which caused a bit of scrabbling to find the right reference numbers for a lot of companies who were doing urgent applications. But simply put, what you need to do is when you're assigning a COS for a new member of staff, or indeed if you're doing an extension, you need to include the PAYE reference number that person is being paid under, basically, when you apply. The reason for doing this is that it allows the Home Office a bit more opportunity to share information with other agencies within the government, so particularly HMRC. It allows them to do more checks to make sure that the individuals are being paid at the correct salary thresholds, and vice versa. So it just allows a little bit better data sharing, a little bit more better intelligence gathering within government. The main reason I've included this on here as well is that all sponsors now need to include all PAYE reference numbers that are associated with your business on the sponsor management system. So you preload them, basically. So there is a function on the sponsor management system where you save each of your PAYE numbers onto your license. So a key takeaway and a key tip for me would be to double check, make sure you've got all of your PAYE numbers on your sponsor management system. If for one reason or another you don't pay members of statutory PAYE, the Home Office will expect you to provide details and reasons as to why that's not the case, so that they can make sure that the person is still being paid the appropriate rates and that the appropriate tax thresholds are being paid. So, for example, high earners who fill out a self-assessment, for example, if they're not being paid through PAYE, then you just need to make sure that that's detailed and explained, and say that that their tax contributions are paid through their self-assessment, for example. One final comment from me on the sponsor management system and some upcoming changes to this. So those of you who are familiar with the sponsor management system will probably share my views that it's a very old, arcane system. It was designed in 2008 and hasn't really been changed since, and lacks a lot of functionality that would really help sponsors and representatives like me. The Home Office announced a couple of months ago that they're going to be updating the sponsor management system to a new version, essentially. So there'll be a lot more functionality. It'll be a lot more user-friendly. You'll be able to access a lot more data, draw reports, easier to find current employees, previous employees, and also easier and less admin heavy to change your details. So the current process is very, very burdensome. It's very administrative. The idea is they're trying to make it much more of a self-service portal so that you can manage your license yourself rather than having to request everything through the Home Office, really. So good news on the horizon. It will probably take them sort of towards the end of next year to get that implemented and get that rolled out, but certainly good news on the horizon from that front. And that brings me to a close.
Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. And, you know, I think just to say that, you know, having you in the team and really sort of, you know, helping with that sort of business immigration, I think, you know, my curveball that I threw at you this week involving a Kuwaiti national who was a student who'd come to the UK as a refugee and left university about 5 years ago. You know, it was a very good exam question, and, you know, you came back within half an hour. And I think just to give clients that peace of mind, because, you know, often we're dealing with documents that are, you know, that are a bit dogged, they're tired, you know, you can't really read stuff, and, you know, it's very hard sometimes to navigate that website. So, you know, if you do need help, even if it's just can I just run this past you, then, you know, do get in touch with Chris. So thank you very much, Chris, for giving us that update. And just to say, we won't be doing a webinar next month. We will be back in September. But just to give you the heads up is about I will be running a training session in September. I've seen, and certainly what I'm sensing from other people, other colleagues in the team, you know, clients are seeing an increase in flexible working requests, particularly as people reassess, particularly around that location. So a lot more working from home requests there. So responding to that, I'm going to be running a session on the 21st of September, refresher for HR, for your managers as well. Please do join. It's virtual. We'll be discussing some tips and techniques, talking about best practice, looking at the ACAS code, looking at some of the risk areas. So again, look out for invites coming forward in the next few weeks or so. And again, look forward to you joining me for that. And also I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you as well, our audience. You know, we do really appreciate you joining us month after month, reading our articles, getting in touch, great comments on LinkedIn and on sort of social media and the emails that we get. So I wanted to thank you as well. You know, we've tried to keep you updated as best we can do over the last 18 months with what's going on. So thank you as well for persevering and sticking with us. So, you know, thank you very, very much. So we won't deal with any questions. We have had some questions, but they are quite technical on the immigration side. Chris always gets the questions. I never do. But what we'll do is we'll come back to you individually because they're quite technical and business specific. So that leads me to thank Chris for joining our webinar today. So thank you, Chris.
Pleasure. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks to Suzanne in marketing for doing all the background stuff. Have a wonderful summer, whether you are going away or staying, whatever you're doing, and I look very much to seeing you all in September. So all the best and thank you very much. See you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.